welcome back to Cindy's Library. And today we are going to do Tolkien talk because I finished rereading the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien once again. I think this is my third or fourth time. In any case, this was edited by Humphrey Carpenter with the assistance of Tolkien's son Christopher Tolkien. And it is not complete. It is never intended to be complete, but it gives some fascinating glimpses into one of my very favorite authors. And yes, I love reading his words and his letters nearly as much as I do his actual stories. And there is a wealth that we have in here. So let's take a look here. His first letter is to G.B. Smith, one of Tolkien's friends from his school days, part of the little club they made called the TBS. And this one is written 12th of August, 1916, from France. Yes, middle of World War I, and Tolkien was in the war himself, and it certainly affected his life, as we can see in this letter. And this is in response to news of the death of his friend, Rob Gilson, another member of their club, the TCBS. The TCBS was made up of Rob Gilson, Jeffrey Smith, and Christopher Wiseman. And so this is to Jeffrey Smith about Rob Gilson's death. And he said, the TCVS has been granted some spark of fire that was destined to kindle a new light, or what is the same thing, rekindle an old light in the world. That the TCVS was destined to testify of God and truth in a more direct way, even than by laying down its several lives in this war. So far, my chief impression is that something has gone crack. The council, and this was the Council of London, about a year and a half before the last time the four friends were ever together. The council was, as you know, followed in my own case with my finding a voice for all kinds of pent-up things and a tremendous opening up of everything for me. And so this really affected Tolkien, even if in a quiet way, for the rest of his life. In fact, in the second edition of The Lord of the Rings, he included this preface, which among other things says, one has indeed personally to come under the shadow of war to feel fully its oppression, but as the years go by, it seems now often forgotten that to be caught in youth by 1914 was no less hideous an experience than to be involved in 1939 and the following years. By 1918, all but one of my close friends were dead. So, Tolkien has been accused of being a little bit too much boys' club, too much optimism in war. And Tolkien could see the attractive side of war, but he was perfectly familiar with the ugly, bad side of war too, and it comes through in so many of his works, starting with The Lord of the Rings. And let's see, the next one I wanted to do was maybe it's this page I wanted. No, I'm not seeing anything here. So oh, here it is. Okay, so this is to a letter to Stanley Unwin, who at the time, October 1937, was, he was the one who was considering The Hobbit at the time. He was a publisher. And so this is what Tolkien said in response to some of his comments on The Hobbit. So actually, the presence, even if only on the borders, of the terrible is, I believe, what gives this imagined world its verisimilitude. A safe fairyland is untrue to all worlds. And I think sometimes grown-ups are a little too apt to forget that. It is wonderful to have something as marvelous as Jack's Beanstalk, but there are also giants there. Oh. This one is from 1941 in June to Michael Tolkien, Tolkien's second son, who was he was training for the Second World War. This is what Tolkien had to say to him. There's a place called heaven where the good here unfinished is completed, and where the stories unwritten and the hopes unfulfilled are continued. We may laugh together. And I have to add these comments a bit later on, which he makes about Hitler. Anyway, I have in this war a burning private grudge, which would probably make me a better soldier at 49 than I was at 22, against that ruddy little ignoramus Adolf Hitler, ruining, perverting, misapplying, and making forever accursed that noble northern spirit, a supreme contribution to Europe which I have ever loved and tried to present in its true light. Nowhere incidentally was it nobler than in England, no, or more early sanctified and Christianized. Yeah, Tolkien was not a fan of Hitler at all. Let's see. Okay, that's the one. So this is a letter to Tolkien's third son, Christopher. And this one is let's see. But certainly there was an Eden on this very unhappy earth. We all long for it, and we are constantly glimpsing it, our whole nature at its best and least corrupted, its gentlest and most humane, is still soaked with the sense of exile. Let's see, in this next one, Alan and Unwin, who had published The Hobbit for Tolkien, were, well, from Tolkien's perspective, they were being difficult about The Lord of the Rings because Tolkien also wanted them to publish the Silmarillion, which is all the stories of the first age of Middle-earth. And so he talked to Milton Walden at Collins Publishers to see if they would be interested. He wrote a very long letter about his legendarium, including both the Silmarillion and Lord of the Rings. And this was what he said about why he was doing this and what he hoped to achieve. Also, and here I hope I shall not sound absurd, I was from early days grieved by the poverty of my own beloved country. It had no stories of its own, bound up with its tongue and soil, not of the quality that I sought and found as an ingredient. Legends of other lands, there's Greek and Celtic and Romance and Germanic, Scandinavian and Finnish, but nothing English save impoverished chapbook stuff. Of course there was and is all the Arthurian world, but powerful as it is imperfectly naturalized, associated with the soil of Britain but not with English, and does not replace what I felt to be missing. Myth and fairy story must, as all art, reflect and contain in solution elements of moral and religious truth or error, but not explicit, not in the known form of the primary real world. Do not laugh, but once upon a time, my crest has long since fallen, I had a mind to make a body of more or less connected legend, ranging from the large and cosmogonic to the level of romantic fairy story, the larger founded on the lesser, in contrast with the earth, the lesser drawing splendor from the vast backcloths, which I could dedicate simply to England, to my country. And he ends this little section with the word absurd. And yet not so absurd, because I think Tolkien essentially managed to create a new mythology for England in his legendarium of Middle-earth. Oh, let's see. Oh. Tolkien also, besides writing about his own work, sometimes wrote about his past. And one of the greatest things that affected him was the early death of his mother when he was about 11, I want to say. And his father had already died when he was 4, leaving him and his younger brother Hilary orphans. And this is what he has to say about the faith that she instilled in him. I think I know what you mean by the order of grace, and of course by your references to Our Lady, upon which my own small perception of beauty, both in majesty and simplicity, is founded. The Lord of the Rings is, of course, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work, unconsciously so at first, but consciously in the revision. And this was to Robert Murray in 1953. All right, and here is more information about Tolkien's life and his writing. This one is to Michael Straight, probably 1956. There is no special reference to England in the Shire, except of course that as an Englishman brought up in an almost rural village of Warwickshire on the edge of the prosperous bourgeoisies of Birmingham about the time of the Jubilee, I take my models like anyone else from such life as I know. So yep, a lot of Tolkien's inspiration for the Shire were based on some of his earliest childhood remembrances of Warwickshire. Let's see. And this one. Here it is. Here is Tolkien's charming description of himself to Deborah Webster in 1958. I am, in fact, a hobbit in all but size. I like gardens, trees, and unmechanized farmlands. I smoke a pipe and like good plain food, unrefrigerated, but detest French cooking. I like and even dare to wear in these dull days ornamental waistcoats. I'm fond of mushrooms out of a field, have a very simple sense of humor, which even my appreciative critics find tiresome. Go to bed late and get up late when possible. I do not travel much. Sounds quite hobbit-like indeed. Let's see, and this one... Tolkien talks to, let's see, I think it's Michael Tolkien, his second son, 1963. I am one who came up out of Egypt, and pray God none of my seed shall return thither. I witnessed, half comprehending, the heroic sufferings and early death and extreme poverty of my mother, who brought me into the church, and received the astonishing charity of Francis Morgan. I brought you up ill and talked to you too little. Father Francis Morgan was given guardianship of the two Tolkien boys after Mabel Tolkien's death. He saw to their education and their spiritual well-being, and the reason why Mabel put that in her will was she wanted her sons to be brought up Catholic. And here is another one. This one is about C.S. Lewis and is to Priscilla Tolkien, who is Tolkien's youngest child and only daughter. And this is at C.S. Lewis's death. So far I've felt the normal feelings of a man my age, like an old tree that is losing all its leaves one by one. This feels like an axe blow near the roots. Very sad that we should have been separated in the last years, but our time of close communion endured in memory for both of us. C.S. Lewis for some time was Tolkien's closest friend during the late 20s and into the 40s, and together they formed the nucleus of what became known as the Inklings. And more than that, Tolkien felt he had an impayable debt to C.S. Lewis, as he describes this letter to Dick Plotz of the American Tolkien Society. This is 1968. The unpayable debt that I owe to him was not influence as it is ordinarily understood, but sheer encouragement. He was for long my only audience. Only from him did I ever get the idea that my stuff could be more than a private hobby. But for his interest and unceasing eagerness for more, I should never have brought The Lord of the Rings to a conclusion. And for nothing else, we can all thank C.S. Lewis for that, because The Lord of the Rings is amazing. Oh. And here Tolkien is talking to Christopher, again, his third son. This is 1972. This is after his wife Edith's death, not that long before, and has some very, very poignant things to say. He talks about how Edith inspired the story of Beren and Luthien in the Silmarillion, story of a mortal man and an elvish princess who together managed to wrest a Silmaril, one of the holy jewels, from the first and primeval Dark Lord Morgoth. It, Barren and Luthien, was first conceived in a small woodland glade filled with hemlocks at Roots in Yorkshire, where I was for a brief time in command of an outpost of the Hamburg garrison in 1917, and she was able to live with me for a while. In those days her hair was raven, her skin clear, her eyes brighter than you have seen them, and she could sing and dance. But the story has gone crooked, and I am left, and I cannot plead before the inexorable Mandos, who is the angelic power over basically the dead in Tolkien's mythology. So that is a taste of what is in Tolkien's letters, some of my very favorite parts. As you can see, he talked about a lot of things to a lot of different people, a lot of publishing business of one sort or another, a lot of letters to his children or to friends, a lot of letters to fans explaining things in The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, or occasionally both. And what can I say? I just enjoy it. It is wonderful. And so if you are looking for some letters to read, and especially if you have an interest in very late 19th, early to mid 20th century, if you are interested in the origins of modern fantasy, then this would be a must-read for you. So that is what I wanted to share with you today in this Tolkien Talk. Hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that a few of you I may have encouraged to pick this up, and if I do, I'd love to hear what you think about it. Or if you've already read Tolkien's letters, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to leave comments, always welcome. So until next time, hope we all stay healthy and happy reading.